A news feed blinked across the skies of 3 star systems, projected on everything from starship windows to the outer membrane of a glistening worm temple on Orion 6. On screen, static flicker, then the slow unfurling of a slug-like creature with lavender ooze leaking from its facial vents. It smiled. That was new. This cycle's top story. The anchor slurred through a translator implant that glitched every 4th syllable. The regrettable CASC neutralization of an unregistered human settlement on Farzana. No fanfare. No mourning. Just another note in the Galactic morning scroll. The footage cut to grainy visuals. Blurred drones whirred through what looked like dust clouds and torn heat shelters. Something once rectangular, likely a solar panel, smoldered in silence. A child's toy, a carved wooden wolf, was half buried in ash. One frame, only visible to the sharp-eyed, caught the edge of a half-crushed comms implant blinking red. There was a sound behind the silence, though none in the Empire's viewing audience noticed it. The blink of vengeance sent. The screen faded to a chart. Minimal loss of Empire resources. 2 ships used. 37 seconds of orbital fire. Final tally. 15 human adults, 3 children. The anchor's tone didn't change. An octopus bureaucrat, swaddled in ceremonial rings, stamped approval onto a floating datapad using a limb that hadn't evolved to write. Filed under pneumatic aggressor disposal, it said aloud, as if that made it real. Humans were, officially, not considered sapient by 6 of the 9 Empire species. Charming, yes. Resilient. Useful in times of cultural flare. But not dangerous. Not really. Just mammals. Hairy, meat-flavored mammals with poor impulse control and inconvenient reproduction rates. Still, the Empire liked their music. The camera cut to a wide arena under construction. A bioluminescent dome ringed by bleachers suspended on anti-grav coils, surrounded by vendors selling fried krill spines and flavored mucus bulbs. In 3 days, the Empire's combat championship would be held here, its sole purpose to distract citizens from food riots and minor genocides. The betting lines were open. As usual, a few hundred species would compete. Mostly theatrics, some violence. Occasionally, a spontaneous explosion. No one bet on humans. Not after the last fiasco. Some young Earth girl with steel in her smile and a blood grudge had managed to blind a Vraktan warrior using only a belt buckle and a shard of her own hip bone. But she died soon after. They always died. That was the point. A bloated general with skin like flaking obsidian snorted into his drink in the VIP booth as the footage rolled past. "Why do they even try?" he muttered. "Weak bones. Too much emotion. No venom." His aide, a translucent eel in a floating exosuit, gave a half salute. "Sir, humans still enter the tournament sometimes. Honor games. Traditions. Humph. Let one enter. I'll fight it myself." Give the crowd a laugh. On Farzana, smoke still rose in strange, slow spirals. Planetary rotation combined with magnetic anomalies made the air spin backward. The fires had burned down. Nothing moved, except for the blinking red dot beneath the rubble. It pulsed, faint, on a cracked bit of alloy shaped like a brooch. At its center, a dim engraving read, "Jane Callister, civilian, mother." 3 sectors away, under a moonless orbit, the signal arrived. A man in a thick winter coat stood on the edge of a quiet outpost station. His back was to the stars. The signal flicked into his comm implant, vibrating in the base of his skull like a whisper. He didn't speak. The others in the room paused. A droid paused mid-weld. A pilot stopped mid-sip. All eyes slowly drifted to him, not because of what had arrived, but because of how he moved when it did. He folded the coat tighter across his chest, like he might be bracing against a storm. Then he knelt beside a locked steel crate and thumbed open the latch. The weapons inside weren't standard issue. Some were old relics from Terran insurgencies. Others looked hand-forged, irregular, etched with strange patterns. He picked one, a long steel blade with no edge. Just weight and silence. A small AI assistant projected behind him. "Jim," it said softly. "You told her you'd stopped. You both did." He stared ahead. then replied quiet and slow, "We told them we were dead. And then we were. Are you sure it's time?" She sent the signal. That means she died watching them kill our children. The AI's light dimmed. "I'll prepare the maps." He opened a second case. This one had only a worn photograph, a family of 4. The boy had Jane's eyes. The girl had Jim's smirk, cocky even at 6. The image had been folded, unfolded, and refolded 100 times. He set it beside the blade, back at Empire Command. The footage had been logged and forgotten. But somewhere in the bureaucratic sprawl, a junior analyst marked a line that said unconfirmed human death, signal ping intercepted. He flagged it to his superior, who skimmed it, shrugged, and marked the box. Non-actionable. On a mining world just past the outer rim, another comms signal blinked alive. It was older, coded for a different receiver. A woman awoke from cryofreeze. Her hands shook not from cold, but from memory. Jane Callister, last recorded as a civilian, stepped into the light of a room lined with blades and books and pieces of worlds they'd once helped break. She pulled on a jacket she hadn't worn in 7 years. Her comm implant pinged again. It showed coordinates, arena site, Empire Combat Championship. She smiled, and it was not a gentle thing. The galaxy hadn't seen Jim and Jane together in over a decade. That was by design. When they disappeared after the last human-Ultharite conflict, most believed they died. Even Earth stopped asking. But humans, true humans, don't just disappear. They adapt. They watch. They wait. The Empire had forgotten that. Jane picked up a long curved projectile shell and slid it into a launcher shaped like a violin case. Every movement was precise, practiced. She whispered, "They killed our children." The silence replied, soft and seething. "Then let them remember who we were before we were parents." On Oron 6, the slug anchor shifted topics. In other news, it gurgled, "General Varagath, current Empire champion, has pledged to personally defeat any vermin-like contestants who appear human in the next arena games." It even laughed. An uncomfortable, wet sound. But that wasn't what echoed across the galaxy. What echoed? Through old war channels, long-dead code rings, and outlawed AI signal bands, was the blink. One red dot, pulsing in silence, calling ghosts back to war. And in every part of the Empire, from bureaucrat to general to arena gambler, not one of them noticed what they had done. Not yet. But the ones who remembered the name, dust, and echo, they were already packing bags. Erasing data. Running. Because Jane was awake. And Jim had opened the box. And the Empire had made the mistake no empire should ever make. They killed the children of killers. And left them alive. Snowfall hissed against the metal skin of the orbital outpost, whispering like ghosts through its antennae. The sky above was starless, just a sheet of cold, silent black, broken by the occasional flicker of drifting debris. Inside, a man stood motionless, watching nothing at all through a reinforced viewport. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was sharpened, held taut by the thrum of something he hadn't touched in years. Jim Callister had lived out of the war for over a decade. His face bore the wear of old battles, faint scarring beneath the right eye, a line through his jaw that caught the light when he turned too fast. His hands, though clean, still moved like they remembered blood. The signal had arrived less than an hour ago. A simple code, burned into their bones back on Earth before they buried their names and tried to be human in a way that didn't involve weapons. Jane had sent it. No words, just location, status, red, final. Now he stood above a storage crate sealed under 6 security protocols, every one of which he'd written himself. He looked down at it, hesitated. "You don't have to open it," a voice said behind him, feminine but modulated artificial. The AI that ran the outpost had chosen a calm, British accent for reasons Jim never understood and never asked about. "She sent the final code," he said, voice dry as sand. "That means they killed her. Or worse. She wouldn't have pressed it unless. I know what it means." His thumb hovered over the scanner. One breath. Then the lid unlocked with a quiet hiss. Inside were not standard weapons. Nothing sanctioned. Nothing the Empire would ever allow to exist. A modified slug rifle, stripped of its tracking systems. A scatter mine embedded with microcharges. A blade, hers, not his, folded into a triangular casing engraved with a stylized wolf, worn smooth from years of carry. Jim's hand brushed across it without lifting. He pulled out a photo, instead. Jane, smiling too wide for the camera, holding their son upside down by the ankles. The girl, Lena, clinging to his leg, laughing in a way only 6-year-olds do when they believe the world is unbreakable. He didn't blink, just folded the photo and slid it into his coat. He activated the outpost communications grid, tapped into black band frequency 009, a channel officially defunct. Ghost static crackled, then resolved into coordinates. A second signal followed, piggybacked, Jane's secondary fallback, activated only in the event of targeted annihilation. The coordinates pointed to an old drop point from the war days. His eyes narrowed. The Empire didn't know what they'd done, but they would. Meanwhile, systems began to come alive around him. Lights flared. Defense grids warmed. The AI spoke again. Should I notify Earth Command? They wrote us off 10 years ago. You were a captain. Jane was. She was their scalpel. I was the smoke after the cut. They buried us because we scared them. You haven't killed anyone in 12 years, Jim. I haven't needed to. He sealed the weapons case again, smaller now, strapped across his back like a courier's satchel. Practical, unassuming, deadly. As he walked through the corridor, the AI added softly, you can't bring them back. He stopped at the airlock, looked back once. No, but I can make sure no one forgets they were taken. Hundreds of light years away, the cryo chamber hissed. Jane's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, until the cold peeled away and memory burned its way back in. Her fingers twitched before her mind caught up. She sat upright, ignored the ice crystals on her eyelashes, and stepped into the chamber's awakening sequence. The room around her was stripped bare, no comforts, no distractions. Just gear, weapons, uniforms that hadn't been worn since the day they vanished from the war records. Each piece was exactly where she left it. Still clean. Still ready. The signal had reached her. Jim had activated the fallback. That meant the children were gone. She stared at her reflection in a darkened terminal. Time had not been kind to her. The lines around her mouth were deeper now, the silver at her temples bolder than she remembered. But her eyes, those hadn't changed. Neither had the weight behind them. She moved without sound. Pulled on the boots first, always the boots, and then the torso armor, lightweight and dull-colored, built to blend rather than shine. She clipped a small device to her wrist, loaded a custom explosive into a thigh holster, and drew her blade from its velvet-wrapped sheath. When she turned it in her palm, the balance sang. The war had ended for her when Lena was born. She remembered holding that tiny body, swearing aloud that she would never again kill for nations, for planets, for governments that turned their eyes away when it mattered most. But the promise had been contingent on one truth, that her children would never become martyrs. And now they had. She sat at a console and opened an encrypted archive, one the Empire never cracked, because they didn't believe she had survived. A cascade of intel poured out, tracking logs, command codes, internal sabotage routes, all of it mapped and arranged into war patterns. The kind only 2 people in the galaxy could read fluently. Her fingers tapped in a short command. Send to Jim. One phrase blinked on screen. Let's remind them who we were. Far above a neutral trade moon, General Varagath reviewed the upcoming combat championship roster. His translator spoke in short, clipped syllables. Sir, no high-risk entries this cycle. Mostly decorative combatants. A few Vuric Hulks. 1 Eric's swarm team. Nothing with reach. Humans. 1 entry filed. Name listed only as J. Callister. The general paused. His mandibles clicked. Amusing. Leave it. The crowd loves underdogs, especially fragile ones. He poured himself another measure of fermented chazal fluid and raised a glass toward the window. They always break in the first 30 seconds. Back on the mining outpost, Jim loaded onto a civilian hauler bound for neutral space. No one gave him a second glance. His coat was unremarkable, his expression unreadable, but the datapad on his wrist blinked once. Message received. Let's remind them who we were. He smiled faintly. The first time in days. Not a happy smile. The kind you see on the face of someone who's remembered what they were built for. As the transport slipped into warp, the stars bent, pulled like threads across space. Time compressed. Hearts didn't. He thought of Jane's laughter, the way she used to hum while fixing circuits. He thought of Lena's questions, too many at once. Of their boys' quiet drawings, always of stars and homes they hadn't visited yet. And now the stars would burn differently. The Empire had called down ghosts, and ghosts were coming with knives. Jane's ship was already en route. They wouldn't meet on Earth. They wouldn't meet in silence. They would meet in an arena. And the Empire, in its arrogance, had sold tickets to its own reckoning. The arena floated like a wound above the Empire's central moon, suspended by nothing more than money, ego, and thousands of tiny thrumming generators. From orbit, it looked almost sacred, an iris of steel and glass ringed in molten red, slowly rotating, a thing made not to serve peace or unity, but spectacle. It was officially named the Imperial Center for Multi-Species Combat Resolution. Unofficially, it was known across 12 systems as the Blood Circuit. Vendors lined the dock tunnels, shouting in tongues both chemical and sonic. Neon fluids boiled in tubes. Live rodents, some armored, ran in circles inside betting booths where clients could stake credits, plasma, or, in one case, a kidney. The air stank of heat-treated scales and a synthetic oil designed to mimic Terran bacon. Somewhere above it all, orchestral screeching played, courtesy of the 8th Choir of Snarleth, a species that made music by vomiting into wind chimes. Security drones swept through the crowds, glancing at faces, scanning DNA traces, logging threats that would be ignored if they generated views. The Empire didn't care who died here, as long as the cameras caught it. Jim moved through the crowd with the casual anonymity of a man who had once survived an orbital bombardment with nothing but dental floss and spite. His coat was gray, his face passive, his eyes low. No weapons visible. No registration yet filed. That would come later. He passed 3 betting stalls and paused when he heard his name, just the initial. J. Callister. Odds 900 to 1. Human. Soft-skinned. Potential comedic value. The screen beside the vendor showed a looped image of a generic Terran outline flexing against a muscular squid-like opponent. It ended with a squelch, and the human being folded like wet cardboard. Jim stared, then smiled faintly, not amused, just familiar with this script. Wager, the vendor, a bird-headed thing with too many fingers, asked him. I don't bet, Jim said, voice low, on short stories. The vendor blinked. You are the human? Jim didn't answer. He kept walking. Backstage, inside the arena proper, the air changed. Dried blood, metal polish, ozone from low-yield plasma discharges. Alien fighters stretched or oozed or shed molting skins. Some preyed on lesser competitors. One Vuric challenger, a spider-lion hybrid with a prosthetic tail, bit its own coach during warm-ups. The crowd loved it. In a curtained chamber, Jane finished calibrating a neural relay tucked behind her ear. It buzzed once, then went quiet. She adjusted the strap of her lightweight chest guard, exhaled, and checked the twin blades embedded in her gloves. They hummed, tuned to her body's rhythm. Her locker bore no name. She'd filed no entry. She wasn't on the books. Yet, the fight board lit up in the center of the arena. 1,000 languages flickered across its arc. First match, a fog breather from the Jetari Corps against a glass-bodied assassin with liquid bones. Blood spattered within seconds. The crowd screamed. The floor was built to absorb and reprocess gore, sold as flavored drink packets in the higher levels. Jim sat in the corner of the preparation bay, still and quiet, until the floor beneath him thrummed. His turn was near. The announcer floated down in a balloon-like hoverpod, an overinflated blob with arms like scarves and a voice like spice grease. Its microphone extended, and it began with gusto. Ladies, gentle creatures, and non-localized entities, prepare your taste organs for a match of absolute tragedy. A human, yes, a real one, has signed up for the Ninth Circuit bout. The audience roared, laughed. A few booed ironically. A group of Haskuri nobles popped pain pills preemptively, hoping for gore. And who faces this squishy meat stick, you ask? None other than, the announcer's voice deepened theatrically, General Varagath, champion of the Tren Wars, veteran of 39 extermination campaigns. The beast of realm. A hologram lit up, 3 stories tall, of a creature shaped like an avalanche made of bone and regret. His body was armored by birth, a dense layering of chitin and plated muscle. He stood at the center of his chamber, already stretching arms the size of hoverbikes. He laughed as the camera zoomed in. "This one bleeds in under a minute," Varagath growled, flexing for the audience. In the prep bay, Jim ran a single finger along the inside of his left glove. A small tab shifted. A capsule embedded in the glove's lining hissed, faintly. Memory drug, legal in some sectors, banned in others. Didn't matter. It wasn't for performance. It was to remember the moment he buried his son. The feel of the cold cloth. The weight of a stone on Jane's chest as she pressed it into his small hand. That kind of pain never dulled, but sometimes you had to sharpen it. His name blinked on the combat queue. Jane's voice came through the private link between implants. Quiet, crisp. "Remember the rhythm?" He replied without blinking. "I never forgot. Give them silence first, then give them hell." He stepped through the gate. The crowd erupted as the human entered the ring, a simple circle of scorched carbon steel, rimmed in red light, beneath a dome designed to amplify sound and heat. The temperature shot up to make the stronger species sweat less. The gravity tilted by 6%, just enough to offset human balance. The sand on the floor wasn't decorative. It held thousands of microscopic surveillance filaments, measuring heartbeats, foot pressure, panic. Jim ignored it all. Varagath stomped into the arena from the opposite side, swatting a floating camera drone aside as he walked. It burst in a cloud of sparks. The crowd loved it. The announcer belched a countdown. 3, 2, 1. The bell rang. Varagath charged like a missile, his feet shaking the floor, his roar cracking the speakers. Jim didn't move. He waited. 2 more steps. He adjusted the heel of his butafraction. 1 step. He turned his shoulder, barely. The beast lunged. And missed. Not entirely. 1 massive claw grazed Jim's coat, but the human had already slipped under, pivoting with a precision born not from speed, but prediction. He didn't dodge. He calculated. He moved where Varagath would be, not where he was. The general turned, slower now. Puzzled. He swung again, this time faster. More force. Enough to tear down a bunker. Jim ducked low, slid across the sand, and palmed a device from the arena floor. One the audience thought was a weapon dropped by another fighter. It wasn't. It was his. Planted before the match by Jane. He pressed the trigger. Nothing exploded. Instead, the arena's gravity dipped for exactly 1.6 seconds. The lighting stuttered. A heartbeat of darkness. Jim stepped in. 1 strike. Not a punch. A flat impact to the throat vents, plated, but vulnerable to precisely the angle he'd just created. Varagath staggered. The crowd gasped. Jim didn't press. He backed away. The general coughed once. Then again. Blood, not red, but a viscous bronze, spattered on the floor. The arena fell quiet. For the first time in recorded matches, General Varagath dropped to 1 knee. Jim tilted his head slightly. Not in victory. In study. He was mapping the next 3 moves when the arena lights exploded in brilliance. Emergency protocols engaged. The announcer sputtered nonsense. And on every arena screen, Jane appeared. Not live. A loop. Just her face. Calm. Steady. The audio echoed in dozens of languages. "You thought you ended us. You didn't even begin to understand us." Then she smiled. That terrifying, human, knowing smile. The feed cut. And General Varagath collapsed. Silence followed. Not from awe, from fear. The kind that stings the base of the neck, like a predator watching from trees unseen. Jim stood over the body, looked up, then walked off the field. No celebration, no speech, just the sound of one man leaving a battlefield still breathing, and the sudden, nauseating realization from the Empire that something ancient had returned. And it didn't need their permission. The arena's emergency lights bled red across the carbon steel floor. Medical drones buzzed toward General Varigatha's collapsed frame, cautiously circling as if unsure whether a creature like that could actually die. Spectators murmured, some in horror, others in disbelief. The betting screens froze. The Empire's top oddsmaker fainted. Jim didn't linger. He exited through a service corridor lit by flickering power strips, stepping past a technician too stunned to stop him. The silence that followed him was heavier than thunder. Varigatha's breathing stuttered once, then stopped. In an empire bred on control, the idea that a human, unaugmented, uncelebrated, could end a symbol like Varigath wasn't just unthinkable. It was unpermitted. The system didn't have words for it yet. But it would. Outside the arena dome, the sky shifted. Jane's ship, disguised unregistered, slipped from orbit like a ghost descending into confession. She didn't land at the docks. She bypassed every scan, sliding into a restricted access port once used by Imperial janitors, and now long forgotten. Her boots hit the ground with purpose, not speed. Precision. She wasn't here to run. Empire Command had just begun to calculate the variables. Within the high court chambers, bureaucrats shrieked, argued, demanded clarity. How had a human made it into the match? Why weren't they tracked? Why wasn't Jane Callister dead? No one answered. Because for 12 years, they'd written Jim and Jane off as history. And history, it turned out, had memory sharper than theirs. In the bowels of the arena, Jane moved like she had a map layered over her vision. Not of this place, but of similar ones. She knew how the Empire built arenas. She had helped sabotage the first 10 during the war, before she changed her name and wore lullabies instead of war paint. This one was newer, bigger, but it obeyed the same ego. Everything for spectacle. No safeguards. No defense against ghosts. She passed a server spine, slid a drive into a hidden port. The spike hit the system hard. Blackout in security feeds, lockouts in response terminals. Protocols spiraled into failure. A few screens blinked once, then played the same loop. Her children's names, their birth dates, their last known location. And then the phrase, "We were civilians, until you made us soldiers again." In a central chamber, the Imperial Arena Board tried to regain control. Their command AI stuttered, then shut itself down in apparent shame. The arena's head of security, a mantis creature with 9 eyes and a tendency to hum when stressed, said the thing everyone else had been avoiding. This wasn't a match. One of the nobles scoffed. Of course it was. The match just didn't go our way. No, the mantis replied. This was a message. Backstage, Jim shed the last of his prep gear. His hands shook, not from exertion, but restraint. Killing Varigath had required no hate, just geometry and will. But now he felt the slow rising of something less mechanical, less clean. He'd promised Jane they'd make a statement. But now that the arena was destabilized and the Empire's prize general was cooling in his own ichor, the next step wasn't tactical. It was personal. Jane met him in the maintenance corridor near the reactor core. She said nothing at first, just looked at him, 1,000 thoughts flickering between the two of them in silence. She looked thinner, older. Her cheekbone bore a fresh scar. But her eyes, those hadn't aged. Neither had the fire behind them. "You made it look easy," she said finally. He shook his head. It was never easy, just necessary. Her voice was quieter now. "You saw the footage?" He nodded. "Every second." She looked away, jaw clenched. "I told them we were out. I told them we were done. They didn't believe you. They didn't know who we were. Now they do." Jane exhaled, eyes closed for a beat. "Are you ready for the rest?" Jim didn't speak. He simply pulled from his pocket a small carved wolf, a replica of the one their son had made before the Empire reduced it to dust. That was his answer. They moved together through the access tunnels, syncing comms, checking sight lines. Every breath between them was a memory. Every step, an echo of something they'd sworn never to be again. But grief is a key that fits every lock. They reached the central command chamber. Security had doubled. Not soldiers, performers in armor. Jim counted 16 guards. Jane looked up at the surveillance node pulsing above them. She tapped a frequency on her forearm console. A low harmonic flooded the corridor. Jane's design, one she'd created when their children were infants and needed to sleep during raids on refugee ships. The guards dropped. Every one. Unconscious. Breathing. Mercy for now. They entered. The room was circular, filled with floating command stations and glowing communication threads, each monitored by a different species of administrator. A few rose when they entered. Most froze. One tried to activate an alarm. Jane shot the panel before the sound finished forming. "We're not here to debate," she said. "We're not here to bargain. We're not here to forgive." Jim stepped forward. "You killed our family." An alien in judicial robes scoffed, voice modulated and saccharine. "You cannot simply walk in here and expect." "I didn't walk in," Jane interrupted. "I planned this entrance 12 years ago." One of the floating secretaries tried to slither toward a hidden vent. Jim fired a dart. It pinned the creature by its clothing to the ceiling. "I recommend stillness," he said softly. The Imperial Governor, a tall, calcified creature with limbs like jagged branches, stepped forward. "You demand justice? What court do you think hears you now?" Jane smiled. It wasn't warm. "Justice is too late. You made this personal." The governor spread its arms. "So what? You want an apology? Retribution? A change in policy?" "No," Jim said. "We want a record." Jane projected a hologram into the room, footage from Farzana. The ruined outpost. The children's bodies. Jane's comm beacon blinking red under the rubble. The governor squirmed, recoiling. "You broadcast every match. Every death. Every spectacle," Jane said. "So now you broadcast this." She tapped her wrist. Across the Empire, the transmission hijacked screens. Civilians watched. Soldiers watched. Pirates, rebels, former allies. All of them saw what the Empire had called routine settlement management. All of them saw who had returned. The Empire couldn't stop it. The virus Jane had embedded into the arena's systems had already leapt into the relay grid. "By dawn," she said, "every outpost will know your truth." The room buzzed with fury. One of the administrators lunged for her. Jim moved first. One blow. Quick. Clean. Enough to break the creature's leg without killing. Jane didn't flinch. "You forgot one thing," she said to the chamber. "About humans. About parents." Jim stood beside her. "We remember our dead. And we make damn sure you do, too." Sirens began to wail outside. Troops were coming. Jane looked at Jim. Time. 17 seconds. She activated the secondary phase of the virus. It wasn't a weapon. Not by traditional means. It was a name. Her son's name. Embedded in the architecture of every Empire relay node. A reminder. It would live in their data forever now. They exited through the north wing as soldiers rushed into the command chamber, only to find a room of frozen screens and panicked officials shouting for backup. In the hangar, their ship waited. Old, modified, anonymous. They boarded without speaking. As the launch thrusters fired, Jane looked back once, toward the arena dissolving in the smoke of its own system's collapse. "They'll come for us." Jim nodded. "Let them. They'll rewrite the records." Not all of them. The ship's NAV systems lit up. Destination. Unknown. They didn't need a destination. They needed only memory. Precision. Vengeance lived in math, too. Jim set the ship to drift before slipping into the co-pilot's seat beside her. "We were just supposed to grow old," he murmured. "Watch them grow up." Jane swallowed hard. "I know." Silence hung between them. Then, as the stars stretched past, Jane whispered, "They thought we stopped being killers." Jim glanced at her. They were wrong. The stars bent, and the galaxy, for the first time in years, remembered to fear two humans with nothing left to lose. Not because of the death they brought, but because they never raised their voices when they delivered it. They just came, slow and unstoppable, like truth, like grief, like the long, cold shadow of justice returned from the grave. And this time, they weren't asking for forgiveness.